If you've been following my advice regarding setting the correct levels for your speakers and tuning your speakers and setting correct input gains, you might have noticed that with your speaking mics, they sound a little bit too quiet. Singing mics, no problem, because singers are usually not whispering. So during the song, you have plenty of volume to ride the fader. But when someone is speaking, usually they're not always speaking loudly. Sometimes they get away from the mic, they speak very softly, sometimes they raise their voice. Since I'm seeing some confusion in the comments about how to set correct levels, I thought I'd make a video about how to set correct gain for the speakers, for the monitors, for your microphones, because correct gain staging is way more important than any EQ or compression or any effect. If you have an appropriate amount of gain on each stage of the signal flow, everything is very predictable. So I'm going to show you very practical steps that I do every time I have a gig. So I already connected all my speakers and I have everything set up. Now I turn on the speakers and I want to decide how loud they should be. My reference point will be -18 dB FS. FS stands for full scale because we have different dBs. We have dB SPL, that is volume in real life, sound pressure level. So everything in the mixer that goes from -infinity all the way up to 0, that is dB FS. And nothing can get above 0. 0 is the clipping point, which means if something gets louder than 0, it just gets chopped off. It cannot get any louder than that. -18 dB full scale is the nominal level, or it's the level that the gear expects to work within. On your old analog mixer, you might have master meters with negative values and 0 and positive values. And the middle where the green meets the yellow, that's the nominal level. That is the same thing as -18 in the digital mixers. So on old gear, it might seem like 0 is in the middle and it's not too loud, not too quiet. And on your digital mixer, you see -18 is like above 3/4 of the way up. And you're like, oh, that's too loud, let's turn it down. No, it's the same exact level. So I usually say where the green meets the yellow, that's the nominal level. But different devices have different layout of the meter, so look for the value, not how it looks. Like for example, the ATEM video switchers have a very big section on the top of the meters that is only 6 dB. Whereas on other meters, the top 6 dB is like a very small section. So look for the values. We're looking for -18 because that is the nominal level. Everything is hooked up. I turn on my speakers and I have the main faders all the way down. Okay, I don't want to have any sound going to the speakers before I know how loud they are. So the faders are all the way down. I'll go to the oscillator and generate pink noise on the main left right at how much? -18 dB. So I'll have signal going to the main mix at -18 dB as if I have some music playing that has that consistent level. And pink noise has a very tiny dynamic range, so it's random noise, but it goes slightly louder and slightly quieter within a very small window, unlike your speaking voice that can be very dynamic. So pink noise is a good representative of a very well mixed song that is compressed and loud. Now I have that signal at nominal level going to my main mix, but the outputs are connected to a matrix. I don't like to mess with the main left-right fader. I like to leave it alone in case I have to send it to a live stream or something. So I start turning up the speakers very slowly until it's loud enough. How do I know if it's loud enough? If you have a calibrated microphone, a dB meter, you can use that to set, for example, to 85 dB SPL or 90 dB SPL. But you don't need that. I kind of know how loud they should be, but a good example is if I'm talking to someone, I'm sitting here and there's someone sitting next to me right here, and I'm talking to them in this voice, very natural, normal voice, and they can hear me well. The speakers are not loud enough. If I raise my voice a little bit and now I'm speaking to them like that and they can hear me well, it is loud enough. If I have to shout and scream and they're barely hearing me next to me, it's too loud. Turn it down. So that's kind of a good gauge of how loud your speakers should be if you don't have a SPL meter. Remember, we're doing that with pink noise. So we have pink noise going to the main mix at -18 dB full scale. And according to that, we are setting the volume of the speakers like I just described. I'll just open a small parenthesis. When you do your tuning, you take measurements and you tune your speakers and you do some EQ on them. If you're cutting a lot, you might lose some volume. So you may want to turn it up a couple of dB, maybe. Now we can worry about the subs, how loud the subwoofers should be. And I've seen people really randomly setting the level of the sub, like just turning it up and having a mono bus and sending the bass guitar and kick drum to the mono bus with different levels, and then having a different level for the fader of the subwoofer, and the bass is like crazy loud and it's gonna make your head explode. Let's not do that. You're better than that. If you don't have measurement software and you're just using your ears, I would recommend, instead of pink noise, to use a sine wave. Keep it at minus 18 dB and very quickly turn on and off the generator. So it's simulating a kick drum. On, off, on, off. That will give you a very good sense of how loud the subs actually are. And that sine wave would be either at 50 Hertz or 60 Hertz, because that's the most common fundamental frequency of a kick drum. If you send pink noise to the subs, it's really hard to judge with your ears how loud they actually are. So I might be sending pink noise like that to the subs and turning them up, up, up. Now I feel like it's loud enough and they are now louder than the main speakers, but I cannot perceive that because it's hard to do that with pink noise and your ears. So then the band starts playing, or I have playback music and the bass is really loud. So if you don't have measurement software, use a sine wave at 50 or 60 Hertz and turn it on and off very quickly to gauge how loud they are, and you set them like that. If you do have measurement software and you have already set the level of your main speakers, then you can use pink noise and turn up the subs until they are about 10 dB louder than the main speakers. So these are the main speakers, and you start turning up the subs until they reach the target curve or about 10 dB louder than the mains. I'm moving the trace right now, but if you have a live measurement, you would actually be seeing the sound of the subs raising when you raise the fader on the mixer. And that way you will have plenty of bass, but it's not overwhelming. It's not too much. So we're only setting the level of the subs relative to the mains. The target curve is not used as an absolute SPL. It has nothing to do with real life. The magnitude graph shows you a comparison between two signals. So regardless how loud or quiet they are, this is a relationship, not an absolute value. So all this graph can tell me is that this trace is about 10 dB louder than this trace. It doesn't tell me how loud they actually are in real life. That's why I told you set the level of the main speakers first with your ears or with a dB meter if you have one, and then you set the level of the subs relative to the mains. Now that we set the correct gain for the main speakers, I want to do the same thing for the monitor speakers. If the musicians are using in-ears, don't care about it. They set the volume on their own in-ears and it's not going to affect anyone. It's not going to cause feedback. It's literally inside their ears. We're worried about loudspeakers. So I'll generate pink noise again at minus 18 dB, and now I'll do it on the buses. So on this mix bus, I'll turn on the pink noise and start slowly turning up the fader of the bus until it's loud enough. How do I know if it's loud enough? Just like I described earlier. Now with monitors, I might actually set them slightly louder than what I do with main speakers. So if I'm turning up the master fader of the bus, and right here it's starting to get uncomfortably loud, I might still turn it up like 3 or 4 dB in case the musician really needs that extra volume when they are all playing together, so that I'm not stuck. So like you can see here at minus 30 it was plenty loud, but I still turned it up a little bit because singers can never hear their voice despite it being the loudest thing on stage. I set the gain for the main speakers, I set the gain for the monitor speakers, and lastly I will set the gain for the input levels. Remember, this is the order in which I do it when I have a gig and I'm actually working. I do these steps. So now we're starting to plug instruments in, plug microphones in. People are on stage. I start with the fader all the way down and I start turning up the gain until the green meets the yellow on the meter. So I'd say, hey, can you play something? Or hey, can you sing something? Usually singers are very shy in the beginning and will be very quiet. So with vocal microphones, I try to prepare them beforehand with my own voice because I know how loudly I need to speak, and then when the actual person comes, I'll tweak it to his voice. So the goal is around minus 18, a little bit more, a little bit less, doesn't matter. And now guess what? When I turn up that fader, I can expect to be able to turn it up all the way to 0 and nothing terrible happens. I can even expect to turn it up to plus 10 and nothing bad happens. Why? Because I already set the level of the speakers. They cannot go any louder. I'm not leaving them on full volume because modern speakers are way overpowered. They are way too loud for almost any scenario if you just leave them at full volume. So I usually find myself turning down speakers by about 20 dB. Most modern power speakers, some of them that are really loud, I turn them down by 30 dB. Some of them that are maybe not as loud or are covering a larger area, I might turn them down maybe minus 15 dB or minus 12, but I'm always turning them down. I have never had a situation where it was appropriate to leave the speakers at full volume, even on slightly bigger gigs. In the summer, I worked a gig where I had to cover 1,000 people, and they were not too squished together. There was plenty of space between the rows, so the actual area was fairly large, and I was using line arrays with 4 boxes each side, and I turned them down by 10 dB, and it was still plenty loud. The reason I'm stressing so hard on turning down the speakers is because in real life you are amplifying the sound a lot more than the signal that is in your mixer. So if the speakers are too loud, even a small move on the fader can be a huge difference in volume in real life. That's why you see people keeping their hands on the fader in case feedback happens, trying to turn it up a little bit, and then they start to hear the feedback and they turn it down again. That's because the speakers are way too loud. If you turn down the speakers to an appropriate level like I just described earlier in the video, you can turn up the fader all the way to plus 10 and not worry about anything and leave it there, and it wouldn't feedback. Which brings me to my next point. With speaking mics, that's what I said in the beginning of the video, even if you turn it up all the way up, you might still feel like it's a little bit quiet. Because unlike singing, speaking can be very dynamic. Some people hold the microphone like that and are speaking very quiet. And then they would get close and shout into the microphone and then speak like that again. So even though you can still hear what the person is saying, it might not be loud enough or impactful enough, even with your fader all the way up. So what I usually do is I just go to the compressor and add gain. Right here. Anywhere between 4 to 7 dB. So that's as if your fader doesn't stop at 10. It goes all the way to 15 or 17. And this gain of the compressor doesn't actually affect the monitor, so you don't have to worry that it might feedback in the monitor, because by default all the channels go post EQ, so before the compressor, unless you changed it. And if the person raises their voice, the compressor will slam down on the louder parts, and if he keeps quiet, you will still have enough volume. And when he sings, you can just turn down the fader a little bit, put it around 0 and it would be plenty loud. And when he's speaking quietly, you can turn it up all the way to plus 10. And you still don't have to worry about feedback. And I can already smell the comments of people saying gain is gain, it doesn't matter, gain in equal gain out. But in my personal experience in live sound, if you turn down the speakers, you are much less likely to feedback even at the same perceivable volume. So to recap, I come into the venue, I generate pink noise at minus 18 on the main mix, then I start slowly turning up the speakers until they are loud enough. How much is loud enough? If I'm speaking with a raised voice like this, the person next to me can hear me. If I'm shouting, it's too loud. If I'm speaking in a normal voice and they can hear me clearly, it's too quiet. And then I would use a sine wave at 50 or 60 hertz, a quick pulse of it to judge how loud the subs are. If I have a measurement software, I'll use pink noise for the subs and set the relative volume to be 10 dB louder than the main speakers. Next step is I would go to the loudspeaker monitors on the floor, generate pink noise at nominal level, minus 18 dB, and turn up the fader until it's loud enough and slightly louder until it's slightly uncomfortable. And that way I can turn up the mic all the way up in the monitor and I wouldn't be afraid that it will feed back. Next step is to set the input gain of the channels until it's around minus 18 dB, and then I could turn up the fader of the channel all the way up and not worry about feedback. If the speaking microphones are too quiet, I can add makeup gain in the compressor section and I don't have to worry about the monitors because they are going before the compressor. If you remember to do these things every time you have a gig, you will have consistent experience every single time. Even if you're using different equipment in a different room, everything will be predictable. You will not be surprised by anything. Feedback will not catch you off guard and damage people's hearing. And that way, by the way, even if feedback happens, it will still not be loud enough to damage anything. Because if my normal volume is around minus 18, if I'm mixing loud, it would get up to maybe minus 6. So in case feedback happens and it goes all the way up to 0, which is the maximum, nothing gets louder than 0. It would only be 6 dB louder than my loudest part of the mix. Whereas if my normal level is around minus 40, for example, or minus 30, and my speakers are loud enough for that level, Then if feedback happens and goes all the way up to +0, that's 30 or 40 dB of volume change, which is a huge difference and can definitely damage people's hearing. So this is not only for consistency, it's also for risk management. There's a certain volume, nothing can get above it. And in case of feedback, you would have enough time to catch it because feedback happens really quickly. And if you have a lot of headroom and a lot of extra potential volume that it can go up, you will not be able to catch it in time. I've had this happen to me in a previous gig where I set levels correctly. We had choir mics. It was outdoors and the street with cars next to us, so I had to turn them up pretty loud, and they were asking for monitors to be turned up louder. So they did feedback, but it wasn't anything catastrophic. It was fine. Like, the feedback happened. I just turned it down. Nobody got shocked or like some horrible thing happened. It couldn't get loud enough to ruin anything. So if you set all your gain stages in that manner, the likelihood of feedback is really low. And even if it does happen, it's not catastrophic. If you learned something new from this video, make sure to hit the like button. Click on the video on the screen to learn how to take measurements, and I'll see you there.